Welcome to our, I guess, fifth program of the 32nd year of the Dr. Harold C. Deutsch World War II Roundtable. Could the veterans of World War II in the audience please stand up and be acknowledged? I know there's a couple of them. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming. Connie is going to take over at this point, and I appreciate that very much. Connie, thank you.
Luckily, even in the early years, the roundtable lectures were recorded, so we have many of his stories preserved. When he passed in 1995, Don decided that not only the roundtable should be named after him, but we should also have a talk dedicated to his research and his life. One of the most fascinating aspects of reading Deutsch's works are the footnotes. I'm a historian, we like to read footnotes. And thankfully, at the time these books were written, the footnotes were at the bottom of the page instead of at the back, so I don't have to keep flipping back and forth. He interviewed as many people as he could find that had anything to do with the conspiracy against Hitler. If the people were no longer alive, he interviewed their family members, their colleagues, and their neighbors. He interviewed Admiral Canaris's neighbors for the Twilight War. And this has helped other historians build on what Harold Deutsch started. And one of those historians is our speaker tonight, Danny Orbach. Before there was Peter Hoffman and Danny Orbach, there was Harold Deutsch. He was the first to write about the conspiracies against Hitler. I joked with Professor Orbach last night when I received his book, I started reading his footnotes. He used Harold Deutsch's papers quite extensively and quite effectively to enhance his analysis. And it makes me smile that even though it's been over 23 years since Dr. Deutsch's passing, he is still influencing scholars. So now let me introduce tonight's speaker. Danny Orbach is a senior lecturer of history and East Asian studies at Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He received his bachelor's degree at Tel Aviv University and his master's and PhD at Harvard University. By the way, just as Harold Deutsch did. Deutsch was a Harvard grad. He has a working knowledge of 8 languages, and he has published extensively not only on the conspiracy against Hitler, but also on the Japanese army. One of his recent publications is entitled The Curse on This Country, The Rebellious Army of Imperial Japan, which was published in 2017. And of course, tonight's work, The Plots Against Hitler, published in 2016. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Danny Orbach.
What I wanted to do today is not just to retell the story of the conspiracy. Otherwise, you will have no reason to buy the book. What I would like to do is to focus on a certain aspect. Klaus von Stauffenberg did not work on this conspiracy alone. There were at least 200 people who were involved. In some books you will read several thousands. This is exaggerated. But at least 200. Think about that. How difficult it is to be convinced to get involved in such a conspiracy. And I don't have to tell you, this is very, very dangerous. You know, if I'm going to tell you, would you join me in a conspiracy against a brutal, bloody dictator? And, oh, by the way, almost 90% that you'll be hanged. And, oh, by the way, your family will be taken away to a concentration camp as well. How convincing should I be in order to convince you to join me? This is very, very difficult. And what I want to speak about today is the revolutionary charisma. The ways in which the very charismatic leaders of the conspiracy were able to convince German officers to join them. Because it's not enough to be against the regime. You have to convince the officers who joins that the conspiracy is at least some chance of success. And this is very difficult. The person we'll focus about today is, I think it's better to close the light, right? It's Henning von Tresckow. He was the military leader of the conspiracy before Klaus von Stauffenberg, a person defined by the Gestapo of the evil specter of the anti-Nazi conspiracy in the German army. Here you see the real Tresckow. Here you see Kenneth Branagh playing him in Tom Cruise movie Valkyrie. And this person was considered by virtually everyone as hypnotically charismatic. And we will delve later into his charisma. So I will try to do three things today. First of all, I say a few words on my encounter with Harold Deutsch and his research on the resistance. Then I'll give a really quick introduction on the German resistance, on the conspiracy up to 1942, when Tresckow became really important. And then I'll speak about his revolutionary charisma and the way this charisma shaped the conspiracy. And I will try to ask, along with you, try to understand, along with you, what revolutionary charisma is. And in general, what charisma is. And our story has to begin in 1933. The Nazi regime takes power. Hitler takes power. The traditional opposition parties, the Social Democratic Party and the Communist Party, most importantly, try to organize illegal opposition. A relatively large network of activists in factories, in schools, in universities. 2 years are passing. We are in 1935. Almost all of the people in these oppositional networks by 1935 are either in concentration camps or in exile or shot in the head. Because popular resistance cannot work under the conditions of a totalitarian regime. If you try to build a large network of opposition, you compromise yourself to penetration of Gestapo agents. And these networks were heavily penetrated by the Nazi secret police and therefore destroyed at the right moment. So by 1935, Hitler was able to virtually destroy all the traditional parties and all the, let's say, expected sources of opposition. Let's say trade unions, churches, and there was virtually no serious opposition in the Third Reich by then, and most of the people supported the regime. The minority that did not was brutally crushed. But Hitler's power derived first and foremost from the great support he achieved from the majority of the German people and from powerful institutions such as the army. When resistance suddenly reappeared, that was only in 1938, and it reappeared from the place where the regime least expected it to appear. That means from the right-wing conservative establishment and from the army. And it all began with a sex scandal, like most things begin. Certain people in the Gestapo, the Nazi secret police, wanted to get rid from the defense minister von Blomberg and von Fritsch, who was the commander-in-chief of the land army. These people were Hitler's supporters, both of them. but they were cautious about, let's say, the Nazis, the aggressive foreign policy of the Nazis. They did not believe that Germany is prepared for war. And for some people in the Nazi party and in the internal security apparatus of the Nazi regime, they had to get rid of. So the Nazis, actually without Hitler's knowledge, this was a plot inside the Gestapo, virtually framed them. They arranged a match between Defense Minister von Blomberg and a woman with dubious reputation, and got rid of him. It was a honor scandal. Then they got rid of Fritsch, framing him as a homosexual. And you can read about this plot in Harold Deutsch's book, Hitler and His Generals. Some people in the army want to protect von Fritsch, not Blomberg. Blomberg was really hated by most generals, but Fritsch was widely beloved. And there is a certain group of officers who come together and try to collect evidence in order to exonerate von Fritsch. They do not intend to overthrow the Nazi regime, only to protect their commander. But a certain person, Colonel Hans Oster, from military intelligence, is a closet anti-Nazi. And he is using this momentum of the rage in the army against Fritsch's demise in order to connect and assemble politicians, especially from the right-wing parties, and officers who were opposed to the Nazi regime. In other words, it took advantage on the attempt to protect Fritsch in order to assemble a secret underground. And Oster's leadership was very centralized. It was like a small clique of conspirators who tried to utilize their military connections in order to use the first opportunity to get rid of the Nazi regime. And this opportunity came in autumn 1938. In 1938, there was a major foreign policy crisis in Germany and Europe. Hitler was about to invade Czechoslovakia in order to take control of the Sudeten region, the Sudetenland. England and France threatened Germany that if they invade Czechoslovakia, England and France will go to war against Germany. Back then, the German public and the German army were very unenthusiastic to fight against Britain and France. The prevailing opinion in the officer corps, especially in the high leadership of the army, was that Germany has no chance to stand in such a war. Not now, maybe after a few years, but not in 1938. The chief of staff of the army, General Franz Halder, and the commander-in-chief of the land army, General von Brauchitsch, were against war as well. And Oster, the leader of the military resistance, again, he was from the German military intelligence, had secret talks with Halder, the chief of staff of the army. And Halder was so much afraid from war that he was ready to collaborate with Oster in a coup d'etat. But Halder gave only one condition. He said, I am ready to overthrow the Nazi regime with the army only if Britain and France will go to war with Germany. Because only in such a case I can explain to the army and the people why I betrayed my government. I did it in order to save Germany from a doomed war, from a disastrous war. And it all depended in the resolve of Britain and France. Because only if Britain and France will stand firm against Hitler, Halder will launch the coup d'etat. That was the agreement. The conspirators tried to send several emissaries to Britain, especially to Britain, less so to France. But the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, didn't want to listen. It didn't take the conspirators seriously. And as we know, Great Britain signed the Munich Agreement with Germany, virtually gave Hitler everything he wanted in Czechoslovakia, and Halder told the conspirators, gentlemen, remember our agreement? I agreed to launch the coup d'etat only if Britain fights Germany. Britain does not fight Germany, I cannot do anything. And this plan failed. Well, even after war broke out, the conspirators tried again. Harold Deutsch wrote an entire book on this attempt during the Twilight War. It's often called in the literature the Zossen conspiracy. Zossen was a town near Berlin where the high command of the army was located. This plan was a farce. At least that's the way I see it. The idea was to utilize the resistance of several high generals to Hitler's plan to invade France. You should remember that at this time the war was mainly in the east against Poland. There was no real war in the west. And several people in the army leadership resisted Hitler's intention to open a war on the Western Front as well. Halder again spoke with the conspirators. Oster and Halder agreed again. When Hitler will start war in the West, we will launch a coup d'etat. But actually, Halder had no real intention to do anything. And the attempts of the conspirators to convince him to act failed. Hitler invaded the West, and guess what? There was no coup d'etat. Instead, what there was a really brilliant German campaign against France that, France crumbled and surrendered after a relatively short period. Hitler had its way, and the conspirators failed miserably. And only then, Oster and other conspirators understood that the entire approach of the conspiracy was blatantly wrong, was fallacious. Because you cannot convince the chief of staff of the army to overthrow the regime in time of war, it just wouldn't work. It didn't work in 1938 before the war. It didn't work in 1939 during the war. The conspirators understood that if they want to overthrow the Nazi regime, they have to kill Hitler first and only then try to convince the high generals to join the conspiracy. And this revolutionary approach was gradually developed inside the inner circle of the conspiracy. But it actually became possible only after Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. Here you see the map of Operation Barbarossa. This is not a lecture in military history. And the only reason I show this map is to say that the German army invaded Russia in 3 arms called army groups. You have Army Group North, you have Army Group Center, and then you have Army Group South. Our story will take place in Army Group Center here. Their headquarters was in Smolensk. And Operation Barbarossa gave the conspirators an opportunity to plan an assassination. Because the expenses of Russia were vast, there was ample space to try bombs, to hatch plots and conspiracies, and the idea was to invite Hitler to visit one of the fronts and kill him there. It is much easier than doing it in Berlin, where Hitler was well protected. And the person who personified these attempts was Colonel Henning von Tresckow. the ally of the conspirators in the Eastern Front. Von Tresckow was the operations officer of Army Group Center, a former banker. He was a staunch anti-Nazi, and almost immediately after Operation Barbarossa began, was ready to cooperate with the conspirators, and Tresckow was all for assassination. His job was to kill Hitler and then let the conspirators in Berlin plan their coup d'etat. There is some debate among scholars how much the Holocaust was an important factor in Tresckow's decision to act against the regime. Some people say Tresckow was against the regime all along. He resisted the criminal orders given to the German army in the East virtually from June 1941. Other scholars say, no, it actually began a little later, only in October, when the Germans moved from executions of young men mainly to a wholesale genocide of women and children as well. In any case, it's clear that Tresckow and his clique, the young officers around him who cooperated in the conspiracy, strongly resisted the extermination of the Jews. I'm quoting, one of them said, "During all the long talks I conducted with officers, I was asked about the shooting of Jews without raising the subject myself. I received the impression that nearly all the officers opposed shooting Jews, prisoners of war, and commissars." Of course, this was not all officers, but that was the state of mind among the small group of conspirators. So all along 1942, the conspirators planned their assassination, and the opportunity finally came in March 1943. Hitler was about to visit Army Group Center when Tresckow's headquarters were located in the city of Smolensk. The idea was to kill Hitler. It was called Operation Spark. And then the conspirators in Berlin, mainly centered in the reserve army, had to begin a coup d'etat. But the idea was to kill Hitler first. And they wanted to do it with a bomb. So they packaged this bomb inside 2 bottles of Cointreau. Some people say brandy. It's not true. It was not brandy. And they were able to activate the bomb before Hitler went to his plane. One of the officers, just one of Tresckow's officers, came to one of Hitler's assistants and said, "You know, I want to bring these bottles of alcohol to my friends in Hitler's headquarters. Can you give this package to my friend?" He actually, you know, when you fly in JFK or elsewhere, they always ask you, did anyone bring you gifts, you know, to bring on the plane? They ask you this question just for this reason. Because this officer unknowingly took Tresckow's bomb to Hitler's plane. And so they were listening to the radio. They thought we would hear about an accident, that Hitler's plane fell, but the bomb unfortunately failed to explode. Probably it was a malfunction combined with the really cold temperature. So actually the mechanism operated as planned, just the explosives did not react. So this bomb was actually based on a chemical reaction and not on electricity, as many bombs today are. Next attempt was made by Tresckow's intelligence officer, von Gersdorf. He accompanied Hitler in a museum exhibition. And the idea was he was supposed to guide Hitler in the exhibition, and he had a belt bomb. Actually, Gersdorff was one of the first suicide bombers in the history of Europe. But he actually activated the bomb. This is the museum. It's called the Zeughaus, which is like the weapons, the armory. He was Hitler's guide. The bomb was activated. He tried to delay Hitler, to give him explanations about the exhibits, but Hitler did not listen. He just rushed to the exit. And Gersdorff had to get rid of the bomb. So this attempt failed as well. There were several attempts by suicide bombers later, and you can read about all of them in the book. But now, I'd like to come back to my main question this evening. Tresckow was universally known as a very charismatic leader. Many people who joined the resistance later said that they did it not only because of Hitler's crimes, not only in order to save Germany, but because they met an agent who recruited them. Someone who was charismatic enough to give them hope that a conspiracy could succeed. And almost everybody agreed that Tresckow was such a person. You can read it in the Gestapo reports. The Gestapo writes about Tresckow, this was the evil specter of treason and defeatism in the German army. Where this person stood, there was treason. And you can hear about it from Tresckow's companions, the people who joined him and later survived to tell the tale. One of his officers, who was a suicide bomber as well, somebody who volunteered to kill Hitler, said, I have never met another person like Tresckow who could win you over to his view with such clarity and common sense. Margarete von Oven was a woman who joined the conspiracy, and her job was to type the orders. Remember, back then gender roles were quite clear. Even in a conspiracy, men are not expected to type documents. So they needed a secretary, and she was the secretary of the resistance. She was recruited by Tresckow as well. And she said, he had an incredible gift for connecting with you and winning you over. He had something. How shall I put it? She asks the interviewer. Have you seen pictures of him? He exercised a very strong immediate influence on his surroundings. He had a great personal charm and the ability to convince. You just trusted him. I want to return to a certain word here. She's asking the interviewers, have you ever seen pictures of him? Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is Tresckow's picture. I don't know what you see, but I see a balding middle-aged German man. Probably Margarete von Oven saw something very different, and she was trying to describe charisma. She was trying to describe to an interviewer something she knew well, but she couldn't really put in words. What was this charisma? This is the question I'm going to ask. How Tresckow actually recruited people. What is charisma, actually? This is something I found in Google. I don't even have to read it. I just brought this nonsense in order to show you how confused is the mere term of charisma, how difficult it is to define it. I would say, first of all, and I'll try to convince you that I'm right, that charisma has several dimensions. First of all, what I call technical. Charismatic people often look good. It's a matter of fashion, how you look, how you carry yourself, and speech. Some people are charismatic, others are not. But charisma is first and foremost something which involves dialogue with a certain crowd. There is no person on earth who would be charismatic in front of all crowds. You cannot find somebody who will be considered charismatic in a Jewish shul in New York, among German officers in the Second World War, and in a Palestinian refugee camp. Because to different audiences you speak in different languages. And charisma is a matter of dialogue. And that's my main argument. In order to be charismatic, you need to solve a problem for your audience. You need to give your audience a good feeling. And this, I would argue, was the secret of Henning von Tresckow. And he had a very serious problem to solve. Because now imagine that you are German conspirators during the Second World War. You are officers and you have to betray your government in wartime. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is very different from the case of Polish or French or Norwegian resistance fighters. Because if the French resistance fighter wins, his country will be free. But if the German resistance fighter wins, his country will lose. His army will be destroyed, and maybe other soldiers who are his friends or neighbors will die. So this is a very, very difficult thing to do. And actually, one of Tresckow's officers, the suicide bomber Gersdorf, even said that we could not have risked the collapse of the Eastern Front. If it were to happen, Germany would be conquered. And von Schlabrendorf, another one of Tresckow's aides, said the German resistance movement was not a profession to which one could devote oneself exclusively. We were Germans. We were in the middle of the war. We had to protect our country against the enemy by force of arms. So this is one problem. How do you solve it? Second dilemma, which is as important, are you a traitor? These people were Prussian officers. They valued the German military tradition dearly. And to imagine that you will kill the leader to whom you swore an oath of allegiance during a war, what kind of officer you are? What kind of Prussian you are? Do you betray the tradition of your forefathers? For these officers, it was very, very painful. And Tresckow actually once said, one has to resort to active revolutionary means. To take this path, we have to throw away everything we learned from our forefathers. So he had the idea that they had to abandon the German military tradition, but it was very painful for him and for the others. And Tresckow was offering his officers a solution, and he did so by leading through his personal example. And his solution was as follows. The first dilemma, fighting your government in wartime. The solution was you fight the Soviets as there is no regime and you pay the moral price. Ladies and gentlemen, these people were dedicated German officers, and they fought against the Red Army just like all other officers, and even better, they did not betray military secrets. Several conspirators did it, Tresckow did not. Never, ever. Because he wanted to serve his country and fight the regime on the same time. And if that involves killing partisans, and even doing things which will be considered today as atrocities, you do it because as an officer, you are committed to the safety of your soldiers and you are committed to your country. And you are doing it while you are trying to kill Hitler and stop the war. You are doing both things as once. And this was the solution to the first dilemma. And was the price justified? Was it justified to, to get involved in a war which was a war of extermination? I will not solve this question here. I will just say that had Tresckow abdicated, that would have been a very easy moral solution from the personal point of view. You will not be involved in anything bad, but you will also lose the chance to kill Hitler and stop the war altogether. And that was the dilemma. By the way, I must tell you, Tresckow was involved, he got an order, in kidnapping of Russian children to slave labor in Germany. Because that's what officers had to do, and he did it. That was the price of resistance. And anyone who speaks about military resistance in the Second World War has to remember this price, because if you don't cooperate in such things, you are not able to resist the regime. That was the deal, in a way. Second dilemma, the tradition. How can you stay loyal to the Prussian tradition while you are resisting the regime? What Tresckow did, and convincingly, and that's why his men admired him so much, he redefined the Prussian tradition. He gave a famous speech and he said that Prussian tradition is actually about freedom. Military obedience is important, but the whole idea of military obedience is to keep the freedom of the nation. And if a tyrant and a criminal rules the country, obedience has no meaning. That is, he gave a feeling to his soldiers that by resisting the regime, they are actually more Prussian, more military than others. They are more loyal to their tradition because they are fighting for the freedom of the German people. And I think the most important thing is redefining the national interest. Soldiers and officers always fight for the interest of their country. And that was an accusation that could be leveled against the conspirators. You are betraying the interest of Germany. And what Tresckow did was redefining that national interest. And I want to give you an example. In 1944, it was clear that the Western Allies will not give any concessions to the conspirators, even if they rule Germany. Even if they overthrow the Nazi regime, Germany will have to surrender. And Tresckow was asked, should we do it? Why should we do it when Germany will not benefit from the coup d'etat? And Tresckow answered, and I quote, "The assassination of Hitler must take place, cost what it may. Even if it does not succeed, the coup d'etat must be attempted. The point now is not the practical purpose, but to prove to the world and before history that the German resistance have staked their all and put their lives on the line. Besides that, nothing is important." Tresckow said in many different occasions that keeping the reputation of the German people and the German army is actually more important than the material interests of the nation. Moral integrity is part of the national interest. And therefore, the conspirators, when they are actually working for Germany's defeat, they are serving the national interest in the deepest sense of the term because they are fighting for the nation's moral integrity. And the people who followed Tresckow could believe that by trying to kill Hitler, they are patriots. And that brings me to the most important point. redefining the enemy. Soldiers kill enemies. That's the basic fact of warfare. Anybody who studied Holocaust history knows well that part of the propaganda mechanism that convinced so many German soldiers and officers to cooperate with the extermination of the Jews was when they were told the Jews are part of the enemy. A commander of a killing unit who was asked by soldiers why we are killing women and children said, the enemy kills women and children in Germany as well in air raids. So we should do the same to the enemy. And the Jews were defined as part of the enemy. Tresckow did the same thing, just the other way around. He tried to convince his officers that Hitler is an enemy of the nation, just like Stalin. And loyal German soldiers have to fight this enemy. Several quotes, Hitler has to kill like a mad dog because he is a danger to the survival of the nation. No matter how you look at it and talk about it, our catastrophe is the doing of a single man. He must perish. We have no choice. And when Tresckow was about to be arrested, he said, I don't want to let the enemy the pleasure of taking me alive. When he said the enemy, he meant the Nazi regime. And by using this rhetoric of fighting the enemy, he was convincing his people that by fighting the regime, they remain loyal German soldiers. And Tresckow's last message, you know, when the coup d'etat failed, Tresckow made a suicide. Here you see it in the movie. In movie Valkyrie, he actually opened the hand grenade on himself. And his last message to his loyal followers was just the summary of his solution to the dilemma, what we spoke about now. Now, Tresckow said, they will all fall upon us and cover us with abuse. But I am convinced, now as much as ever, that we have done the right thing. I believe Hitler to be the arch enemy not only of Germany, but indeed of the entire world. In a few hours' time, I shall stand before God and answer for both my actions and the things I neglected to do. I think I can, with a clear conscience, stand by all I have done in the battle against Hitler. Again, see this rhetoric of the Nazi regime as an enemy. A few words about Tresckow's successor, Klaus von Stauffenberg. The famed leader of the resistance, the assassin of 20th of July 1944. Stauffenberg was as charismatic as Tresckow and even more. He, some people said, was able to hypnotize people through his voice. People followed him, people admired him. And yet, when it was clear that Stauffenberg failed to kill Hitler, nobody listened to him. His charisma dissolved immediately. Because when it was clear for the German officers that Hitler was alive, Stauffenberg did not solve any problem for them. He became a problem. And charisma is all about solving problems for your followers. It doesn't help you at all when you yourself becomes the problem. So to conclude, what is revolutionary charisma? I would say revolutionary charisma is letting your audience understand that they may belong to an elite group that goes against the grain, and yet that they can preserve at least some of their previous values. Think about the officers who followed Tresckow, and he let them or made them believe that they can fight the regime while keeping true to their military and Prussian tradition. Then solving problems for your audience. Willingness to pay a personal and moral price. And in this way, Tresckow's suicide was the peak of his career. He gave the example that he was really sincere and ready to die for his convictions. And yet, and this is maybe the most important lesson, charisma is unreliable, precarious, and tends to disappear when instead of solving problems, you become the problem yourself. And that's what happened to the German resistance and to Klaus von Stauffenberg in the failed revolt attempt of 20th of July, 1944. And I want to end with an answer to the dilemma that I raised relatively in the beginning. I asked, was the moral price justified? Was it justified to take part in war crimes in order to resist the regime? I am always answering that with a Jewish saying. You know, the Jewish fable speaks about an old woman who was selling apples in the market. Some bully came and kicked her apples, and the apples spread, and people in the market were stealing the apples all over. And she was crying to the mercy of the audience. And a wise man passed and told her, do not cry and do not complain. Snatch as many apples as you can and save as much as you can. Thank you very much.
You didn't mention Beck.
I didn't mention Beck, yes. I can speak. Beck was the political leader of the German resistance. He was the civilian leader. He was the leader above Tresckow and Stauffenberg. Because I focused on the notion of revolutionary charisma, I didn't mention him, but you should know that he was the leader of the entire movement. He was the chief of staff before 1938. He resigned because he resisted Hitler's bellicose foreign policy, and he remained the leader of the resistance to the end. He was supposed to be the head of state after the revolt in 20th July, and he was killed by a Nazi soldier after the revolt.
How concerned was Hitler about internal threats, and what type of measures did he take to try to prevent them?
That's a very good question. In fact, he was very concerned. He didn't expect the right-wingers and the army to be the ones to do it, because he actually looked down on them. He saw the real enemy as the left. But he was always afraid, and he took a lot of security measures. For example, Hitler changed his plans all the time. And that's why many attempts failed. For example, the attempts of several suicide bombers. Because Hitler changed his plans frequently, so it was difficult for an assassin to catch him right on time. And of course, he wore a vest. He was very well protected. His guards were very skillful. Assassinating a dictator is very dangerous. Very dangerous, always, very difficult.
Question here, yes.
Yeah.
Did the Nazis have an organized succession plan or continuity of government in the case he was assassinated? And if they did not, was he? Were they vulnerable to a coup succeeding?
Not at all. The Nazis didn't have an organized succession plan. Hermann Göring was supposed to be Hitler's successor, but he was not accepted by many people. And that's what the conspirators planned. The idea was that the regime would fall when Hitler would die because Hitler held the regime together. I didn't speak about it today, but the Valkyrie plan was the operational plan of the resistance. The idea was to kill Hitler, then say that the SS killed Hitler, and use it as an excuse to take over the country. And only then, when the conspirators will control the country, they will admit that they killed Hitler.
The German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer was part of some resistance too, enough that he lost his life over it. And was he involved at all in what you were talking about?
Very much
tonight?
so. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was privy to the plan. He actually gave spiritual advice to Stauffenberg's aide, to one of the assassins. And he was just arrested in 1943, but he was involved all along. So yeah, very much involved in the inner circle, actually.
If Stauffenberg's plan, assassination, did succeed, do you think there was a high chance that that coup could have succeeded?
There was, I would say, a 50% chance, if I can assess it, because there could have been many difficulties ahead, but certainly the regime would never be the same. But I always say there are some people who say, had the conspirators succeeded, then many Germans would blame them for losing the war, and Nazism would not lose its support and power. That may be true. But on the other end, you should remember that more people died in 1944 than in all of the previous war years taken together, 1944 and 1945. So at least we would have saved millions. And I think it was worth it.
If the plot had succeeded, like, did they actually plan for like a military march into Berlin?
They planned to take over Berlin with their troops. They didn't plan a military march, but what they did plan was a radio broadcast to the nation. And it begins very dramatically. Germans, the dictatorship of Hitler has been broken. So it was supposed to be very dramatic.
So how far did they think ahead in terms of what both Russia and the United States would have done? So they kill Hitler, they're in power, but I don't think that the Russians would have stopped one whit. And I kind of doubt that the United States would have either. So
the original idea was to achieve some negotiated peace with the West and continuing fighting in the East to stabilize the front and reaching some kind of a ceasefire eventually. But in 1944, it was clear to the conspirators that the Allies would demand unconditional surrender on both fronts, and to their, I think, credit, it must be said that they decided to go on with the coup d'etat anyway. Even though they knew unconditional surrender is a must. Remember that during the lecture I quoted Tresckow said the assassination must be attempted, be the cost what it may be. It was in that context.
After the July 20 bomb plot, how did the average German respond, particularly like the average German soldier and the average German, because, you know, they're losing the war and things are not looking good in Germany?
We have a lot of information about that, actually, because we have the Gestapo reports on German public opinion. By average, the vast majority of people in the army and outside opposed the coup, were enraged against the conspirators. There was a new wave for support for Hitler, which was actually going down. Actually, the assassination raised this popularity because many people believed Hitler, who said, you know, now I know why Germany is failing. It was because of this group of traitors. And now when this group of traitors is eliminated, Germany will win again. Well, it didn't happen. And this wave of support for Hitler after the conspiracy went down relatively quickly.
So, Dr. Orbach, at the risk of talking about popular stuff from Valkyrie, you only alluded to the fact that Tom Cruise got all the hot lines, so to speak, but there were some things that you said that they sort of distorted history a little bit. So, without going to a half-hour lecture, can you tease out a few places where history and movie depart?
Well, I think they really simplify the entire process of getting into resistance. They avoid the fact, and I think that's the most important distortion, that Stauffenberg joined the resistance rather late, in 1943. It was not because he did not resist the Nazi regime earlier. He actually started to resist the regime in 1942. But it took him a lot of time to actually meet the conspirators and get privy to their plans. And in the movie, it was represented as if Stauffenberg was the only one or the main figure, and he had to convince everybody else to join. Actually, some of the people that Stauffenberg tried to convince to act in the movie were in the conspiracy well before him.
Was Rommel part of the plot, and his chief of staff, Hans Speidel, seemed to come out smelling like a rose shortly after the war, and then became a hero and head of NATO and everything like that. Any just general comment about that?
Well, Rommel's involvement in the plot is one of the golden questions. It's hotly debated. If he joined the plot, it was at the last moment, on the very last moment, in June 1944. The only testimony we have about that is of one of Stauffenberg's assistants who was badly tortured, and he mentioned Rommel's name. And according to this one single testimony, he met Rommel and asked Rommel, will you cooperate? And Rommel said, you can tell the people in Berlin that they can rely on me, but we are not certain that Rommel actually said it. And even if he said it, we don't know how he would have acted actually during the coup. You know, Rommel was wounded a little bit before the coup in an air raid, so it was not put to the test. Rommel told his wife before he made the suicide that he was not involved in the conspiracy, but you cannot trust that either because he may have said it to protect her. So we don't know. That's the answer.
Why did the British refuse to work with the conspirators, especially in 1938?
So in 1938, it was very different than in 1944. In 1938, it was Neville Chamberlain. I used to be very critical of him for not cooperating with the conspirators. Now I have more understanding for what he did and why he did it. As far as he is concerned, he is a responsible head of state. He has foreign policy, which he believes is correct and was thought of, discussed. And should he change his foreign policy because a group of conspirators that he doesn't know just come to him and say, we will stage a coup d'etat? According to Chamberlain's view, relying on such people would be very irresponsible. And that's why he rejected their advances.
Question here.
I've seen the branches of the German armed forces referred to very broadly, obviously, as the People's Army, the Nazi Air Force, and the Kaiser's Navy. I suppose because of what's in the hearts of their leadership or something. But I'm wondering if, in your opinion, there could have been such a depth or a number of conspiracies hatched within the Luftwaffe or the Kriegsmarine, or was it necessarily the Army with its long tradition?
Necessarily the Army. Okay. First of all, I would a little bit differ with your definitions here, because the Navy and the Air Force were both Nazi creations. The Navy was not a continuation of the old Imperial Navy. So the Navy and the Air Force were more ideologically Nazi than the Army. Doesn't mean the Army was not Nazi. There was a great support for Hitler in the Army. But there was more chance for small groups of conspirators to appear in the Army rather than in the Air Force and the Navy. As far as I know, there were no Air Force officers in the conspiracy, and there were 2 Navy officers. I think only 2 that I know of.
During the takeover of Germany by the Nazis, there was, as far as I'm aware, sort of an idea that Americans really should be in the war helping Germany defeat communism in Russia. Did the resistance ever consider trying to reach out to the United States as a possible, let's team up and defeat the Soviets because they're the real enemy anyway, that might have, since it might have picked up more support in Germany, because that's one of the main things that Hitler used to get power, was insisting that the communists in Russia were going to make this takeover, they were the real enemy. That's actually sort of how he got the hatred for the Jews thing going, is saying that they're the ones leading communism. So did the resistance ever try a team up with the States?
Well, they try to reach out to the United States all the time. They did it through the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA in Switzerland especially, but not only. There were negotiations with OSS people and the resistance all the time, but the United States, like the British, were not ready to give the conspirators any promises or concessions. Roosevelt, actually, President Roosevelt vetoed that personally and completely. But you are right, the conspirators, or at least some of our diplomats, did try to argue, if you don't cooperate with us now, we will have to turn to the communists. We will have to turn to the Soviet Union. That didn't work.
How did the conspirators keep from being infiltrated by the Gestapo?
In a way, the civilian wing of the conspiracy was heavily infiltrated. The Nazis didn't want to crash it because probably they waited for more people to join until it was too late. The military wing was not infiltrated at all for two reasons. First of all, Tresckow and Stauffenberg and Oster, before the three leaders of the military resistance, kept information security. They made sure that each person knows the absolute minimum, and they were very careful with whom they spoke. But remember that the German officers' corps, like many other officers' corps, had strong cohesiveness. It was considered improper to inform on your friends to civilians. So even if a Nazi officer heard that somebody is anti-Nazi, there were great chances that he would be silent, because a German officer does not inform on another German officer. Of course, many officers did inform. It was still dangerous, but it was less dangerous than in civilian life. I think, but for this tradition of the officer corps, of inner cohesion, it would have been very difficult for the conspiracy to develop.
Well, we know that the Nazis gave Stalin false information about conspiracy within the Soviet Union. Do we have much information or any information that the Soviets, for whatever reasons, in the 1930s, especially late 1930s, might have informed the Germans that something bad is going on with some conspirators in your group?
I don't know of any such information, but I would add that the former last German ambassador to the Soviet Union was a member of the conspiracy. And when they wanted to reach out to the Soviets, Werner von der Schulenburg, when they wanted to reach out to the Soviets, he was the designated person. Actually, they debated whom to appoint as foreign minister. So one option was Ulrich von Hassel, who had connections in the West. And they said, if we bet on the Soviets, then Schulenburg will be foreign minister to reach out to them.
Well, we're going to call it a night, and thank you again, Danny, for carrying on the legacy of Harold Deutsch.
Thank you very much.
Support for this program provided by viewers like you. Thank you. Additional support provided through the Catherine B. Anderson Fund of the St. Paul Foundation. Upcoming roundtable topics can be found at www.mn-ww2roundtable.org. Production services provided by Barrows Productions.